This is Sybert signing in to Red Alert 3 on the map Infinity Isle, and spawning on the left side as the yellow Soviets, we have Dimon. And on the right side, as the red Soviets, we do indeed have from Team H2O, their representing Soviet player, Jeje. Or perhaps it's pronounced GG, as in he only shows GGs. I don't know. Look, you know what? This guy is probably French, because a lot of the H2O guys are French. Maybe all of the H2O guys are French. I guess now that Couch isn't H2O. No, I'm sure one of them isn't French. But that is kind of the French clan of Red Alert 3 as far as competitive clans go. Of course, there are other non-competitive clans, and it looks like Jeje will be claiming the first blood. He will be getting the first kill there with that bear, winning the bear war of attrition, which really isn't all that important. If you snipe an engineer, then suddenly it becomes a lot more important. Much later war factory coming out for Jeje. I'm guessing, yeah, Dimon went He went one refinery into war factory before second refinery. And as you can see, we've got the much, much faster double refinery coming out from Jeje. Bit more of an economic-focused build, but also Jeje is dumping a lot more money into infantry. So that's kind of his decision, while we have the more heavy vehicle focus from Dimon, which in some cases can lead to really, really cost-effective trades for the player who goes early vehicles. But in this case, he wasn't able to clean up a lot of this money that's been spent on infantry before the factory of Jeje didn't come into effect. So now, I don't know that it was actually necessarily so much better to go factory first rather than your second refinery, but we will end up seeing. It'll probably end up being about the same for each player, but of course it's going to be coming down to the control and the micro that they can both show us in this battle. Sickles getting targeted down. The conscripts are being eliminated one by one. And Dimon, is he going to let any of these sickles die? He really, really shouldn't when he's got 4 of them here. He doesn't need to be sending them back. And Dimon is going to be forced to retreat here as the numbers are a little bit overwhelming for Jeje. He also does have that cash bounty, which will be getting him a little bit of money. And as you can see there, every time a sickle dies that's got a little $ above it, Jeje makes a little bit more cash. Dimon is going to be losing at least one more sickle, and it may still end up rewarding Jeje, but he's trying to let it survive as long as possible. He does clean up that last terror drone, and there's more sickles are just pumping on out. Ooh, Jeje, he did not need to lose that extra sickle. Just straight up did not need to lose that sickle. Could have saved it if he wanted to micro, decided not to. Potentially there was maybe a little bit of lag preventing that, but, I mean, all things considered. Harvesters being harassed just a little bit, while at the same time, there hasn't really been any pressure from put on Dimon. Of course, he's been the one applying pressure, which will give himself some nice breathing room, and actually continuing to put on a little bit of pressure with these sickles. He will end up getting targeted down, and of course, with adaptive armor, these harvesters aren't going to be taking very much damage, but it's not always about killing off the harvesters or doing devastating damage. Sometimes it's more important to just pull them off the line for an extended period of time, force your opponent's army out of position, and then open up more opportunities like this, although this is not as good of an example because this sickle is not necessarily going to be doing very much, but sometimes you can open yourself up for some nice avenues of attack. Dimon going to be forced to pull his sickles, and of course with no crusher crane out for either one of these players, they're going to have to be very careful about their forces. Airfield coming up, and that's kind of the other advantage that Dimon has, is that he knows exactly what his opponent's doing. He knows exactly what all of the timings are. He knows where the MCV is, what the tech choice was, and the fact that there's no airfield because there's been so many sickles and hammer tanks for the defense. At the same time, Dimon has remained completely unscouted. So Jeje doesn't know about the MCV pack-up. He doesn't know that it was immediately, or not quite immediately, but almost immediately into the airfield after that super reactor, and that the number of units out on the field is actually quite low. Now, of course, this one terror drone can be quite dangerous, but it looks like Jeje did identify, oh, I don't actually have proper anti-air, which means if I stick around with that twin blade, I can end up losing in a very cost-ineffective way for me, and allowing Dimon to take a super cost-effective trade. This Ore Collector will eventually get targeted down, and it will be getting locked down by that stasis ray, and you know what? Terror Drone versus Terror Drone usually works out for whatever player ends up having the Twin Blade. The MiG, however, is, of course, going to be hunting down that Twin Blade, and there is going to be the pickup of, I'm assuming, this Hammer Tank. No, he does cancel it at the last second there. Cleans up the Twin Blade anyways, tries to save it with a Bullfrog. And I'm not actually sure who's ahead or behind. Now, the advantage may end up going to Dimon purely because he does have the much faster third refinery. But if the trades end up being more cost-effective for Jeje, then he may be able to negate the advantage of having that extra eco. Or if he's able to sneak over here and snipe down this oil derrick, he could do some latent damage in the economy front to Dimon. Oh, wait a second. Wait a second. That third refinery was canceled. That's not good. He needs that cash for something. Apparently, he got really worried by that impending attack, which actually wasn't really an attack. It ended up just being a couple of, well, air forces moving in and then backing off after not really doing anything. Satellites most likely getting called down, although no, it could indeed, based on the positioning, could be the Badger bombers for the toxins, just because typically you tend to call it down more directly on the structure if it is satellites. Rather, you know, if you want the Badger Bomber, the Desolator airstrike to drop its toxins, you're going to do it where the units are, rather than on top of a building. Third refinery going to be established for Dimon, but Jeje targeting down that oil derrick just like he should, and it turns out the faster refinery was actually finished by Jeje. I would have really liked to see Jeje actually clean up that oil derrick, but Dimon is going to pick up a sickle, because he was there to defend that oil derrick. But yeah, perhaps a couple of Twin Blades could swoop in, take out that oil derrick, easy peasy, no real problem there. And Harvester taking a little bit of damage again, just going to be scared off by that Bullfrog. Shouldn't be too big of a deal. This Harvester, on the other hand, is actually quite close to death and could be picked off by a couple of volleys from Twin Blades, depending on if the adaptive armor is activated or not. I would say the next big engagement could be bad, but it's not even going to be a big engagement just because the biggest thing in the fight for Dimon is going to be his MCV. The numbers and the Terror Drones could really swing the favor of this battle into Jeje's favor, but not necessarily because, again, it's going to be coming down to that control. Donating one Twin Blade, maybe not the best choice, but he does snipe down the Terror Drone, which may actually make this worth it for Jeje, because it means his units can actually escape. They can, of course, outrun that MCV by default. Now, are there actually any Bullfrogs? It looks like the answer is no, as unfortunately the MiG isn't even here for support, and no, that Twin Blade does not get cleaned up very quickly at all. Is the MiG even anywhere out on the field? It may be completely gone at this point, but yes, that Twin Blade will clean up that Harvester. A nice kill there, but it does end up getting finally killed off by that MiG, who has, of course, earned an extra little stripe there. That first chevron, that veteran status for killing off a couple of Twin Blades. Fourth refinery coming down for Dimon. We can't say the same about Jeje. His is going to be just that little bit slower, but if you look at the army size, that's where the difference comes in. The number of hammer tanks is going to be in favor by like 3 or so for Jeje. Now, Terror Drones are one of those units which can, of course, really change the outcome of any battle in Red Alert 3. Still no Crusher Cranes from either player as far as I know, although Dimon definitely doesn't have one. Jeje doesn't have one, which means, of course, units aren't going to be repaired at any point, so this damage is permanent. Cancelled. Once again, these refineries from Dimon just are never actually finishing on time. It's like their budget for construction gets canceled halfway through the project, and then in a strange turn of events, Jeje is actually the one finishing the third and the fourth refinery so much earlier. There's the MiG for the scout. Desolator airstrike gets called down on this. Oh my word, that ore collector is just right on the edge of the toxins. Not visually on the toxins, but he was within that radius for the toxins and is going to be taking a little bit of damage. Also, of course, the more important factor is that that harvester is not mining. So yes, there technically are 4 refineries out on the field for Dimon, but of course, everyone can tell that only 3 of them are mining, and that is, of course, very bad for Dimon. Can he actually activate adaptive armor? No, the Terror Drone does get the infect. A nice move there, but that should alert Dimon that there may be more Terror Drones, and he needs to look at his mini-map a little bit more closely. He needs to keep an eye out for those Terror Drones. While we do have the Bullfrog Terror Drone combo, most likely going to be heading over to that water expansion location, and the Twin Blade is here for the kill. Goodbye, but nice cash back there for Jeje. Okay, there the Twin Blade finally does turn around. Bullfrog does split off to the main base, while it looks like the Harvester doesn't actually get sniped there. This is what the Bullfrog is for. It's to stop the Twin Blades, because in this scenario, what is the most likely thing that you're going to respond to a Terror Drone with? It's, of course, going to be those Twin Blades. So the Bullfrog would ideally like to get some shots off there. Wasn't quite able to make it happen. Harvester does take a little bit of damage there, going down to about half HP. And hey, if you fail, try again, says Jeje. Maybe Dimon will be a little bit more distracted this time. Maybe he won't quite realize that the Terror Drone is incoming and he can get a nice shot off. At the same time, we haven't actually seen too many more hammer tanks get pumped out. Dimon has more been focused on actually getting his navy up and running, and also is going to be establishing himself another naval yard, which could just be for a little bit of build radius and protection, as he does sell off the one in the back end. But there is going to be the ore refinery on the front lines. Ore refinery number 5, as these guys are playing out more of a slow, methodical macro game rather than a super high aggro game of just units. It's going to be more about that bigger economy and cementing a later game victory. Terror Drone does get sniped down. A nice move there by Dimon. Tesla Coil, will it actually stand? Of course. That special ability didn't necessarily do as much as I thought, although maybe it was actually just regular torpedoes the first time, as this Tesla Coil is going to be able to do a fair bit of damage. But if there's a second Akula sub on the way, it may end up cleaning up that Tesla Coil. No. Maybe it won't clean up the Tesla Coil, as there is no second Akula sub. Not yet, at any rate. Oil derricks do still stand for both players. 4th refinery has been established some time ago for Dimon, but of course it's up against a 5th refinery of Jeje, our H2O player, proving that he's got a little bit of a mastery over the water, claiming twice as many refineries out on the water as his opponent. Neither one of these guys really teching up to Tier 3 all that much, although we do have a technical Tier 3 tech for Dimon. He hasn't really done anything with it. He could be going for Natasha. He could be going for V4s, which I think is the more likely choice there. As artillery is one of those things that in any matchup is good. You don't necessarily want to go for all of the big, like, late game units, King Onis and Mammoth tanks really being what comes to mind there, as Mirage tanks are good in lots of matchups. But you don't necessarily always want to be going for Mammoth tanks or King Onis if you're Soviets or Empire, depending on the matchup. But you almost do in every matchup want to go for artillery at one point or another, and it's so you can do stuff like this. Our refinery taking some pretty good shots. Twin Blades coming. They're going to be able to clean up that V4 absolutely no problem, and there's a limited amount of aircraft killing forces here for Dimon, which means he's actually not going to be able to stop these Twin Blades very effectively. Twin Blade going down potentially. No, Jeje does not manage to actually kill it off. In fact, he loses his Bullfrog and a Stingray in the attempt to kill off the Hammer Tank and the other forces that were there. Even the Terror Drone ends up going down, as that Terror Drone surprise sometimes being quite effective, but in this case, not very. More Mammoth tanks potentially going to be pumping on out. Apocalypse tanks. Why was I thinking Mammoth tanks? I guess a little bit too much Kane's Wrath, but Kirov reporting. Yeah, still one of the coolest units in any game. Just a giant blimp that has insane amounts of power to drop bombs, but the Dreadnought could be what ends up really swinging the favor of this game towards Jeje, as he is unloading rocket after rocket onto this refinery to clean it up. Don't forget about that Kirov, because it could also be very, very important. One final volley of rockets will be enough to finish off that refinery. Goodbye, refinery. Hello. Well, I don't know what these Bullfrogs are actually doing here. Like, there's not a whole lot to support them to help them clean up those Twin Blades, so they have limited use as far as a direct assault goes. Dimon, figuring out that maybe he needs to pull some of these cards for his own use, is going to be sending a Kirov on one front and a Dreadnought in for a bit of support. There's a couple of Dreadnought shots firing off, going for the Bullfrogs. Not actually going to be able to do a whole lot there, but the bombs have been dropping. The helium mix is optimal, and this Kirov will end up cleaning up that refinery without too much trouble. Can he actually get a crash landing on the super reactor? Not quite, but he might be close enough to do a little bit of splash damage. Does a little bit of splash damage, not too big of a deal there, as we do have the V4 potentially striking down on a Dreadnought. No, not actually going to be going for the Dreadnought. Terror Drone will help that V4 actually kill off the Stingray, which ordinarily wouldn't actually be possible. And a cloud of Twin Blades, I guess, is what actually killed off that Dreadnought over in the north. Is there a Dreadnought reproducing? It looks like the answer is yes for Dimon, but Jeje, can he actually be broken? Of course, on the land, he has quite the army just waiting here. Of course, V4s could be the ticket for Dimon to break this. Also, clever use of Terror Drones and Tesla Coils could also help Dimon be extremely cost-effective. This Bullfrog really should just be run into range of that Twin Blade, or of that Tesla Coils. Twin Blades come into the north, going to be going for the snipe a little bit there. I don't know if it was actually worth it trading out the Twin Blades and the MiGs, as I think at least one Twin Blade ended up going down there, and a MiG went down as well. And, oh my word, is this Terror Drone? The Terror Drone actually gets an effect on a fully heroic Dreadnought. Is there a Crusher Crane out on the field? Yes, there is, but that's not down on the water. It's too far away. And this Dreadnought doesn't really have any hope of surviving unless a Crusher Crane went down right now. And even then, I don't know if it would be enough, just because that Twin Blade is adding a little bit of extra DPS. Another Dreadnought does go down and get some nice shots off, I guess, on that super reactor. And goodbye heroic Dreadnought, as it will end up getting sniped most likely there. Again, with no Crusher Crane out on the water. Oh no, the Stingray special ability, that's right, he clears up the Terror Drone with the Stingray. A nice use there. I completely forgot about that secondary ability that clears up the Terror Drones. And that Dreadnought technically still did go down. Fully heroic Twin Blade out of the mix as well, just for getting the kill on that Dreadnought, since the Terror Drone could not have gotten the kill as it got eliminated. Apocalypse tanks do make up a hefty portion of this army, but there's no artillery. Of course, you could count the Twin Blades as a type of artillery, since they can accomplish a very similar purpose to the Twin Blade. They can fill a similar role, if not exactly the same, similar enough in the army composition. Hammer tanks formed up at the front, bit cheaper, bit easier to absorb the shots, but there's not too many V4s. There's not necessarily too many tanks here, but the angle of engagement could be very favorable, although if Desolator Airstrike does drop on this army, then it may end up being very favorable for Dimon, or for Jeje, as Dimon is forced to move forward into the engagement. There's going to be the Harpoons firing out all of these Apocalypse tanks, trying to get targets on one thing or another, but a lot of these other units are being already targeted, which means these other tanks need to just switch back to their regular guns. And more support powers being called in, at least for Jeje. Not so much for Dimon, as he's not actually the one with apparently support powers on cooldown. His one Twin Blade is off to the side. He's trying to get some nice shots off, but I don't know if it'll actually be enough, as we do have... I don't actually know why that tank is being locked down. I guess because it was being harpooned, but kind of an odd thing to see there, as Dimon is just being crushed by the sheer numbers, although again his V4s are actually doing some pretty serious damages. One of them is heroic, the other one is elite, and potentially about to go heroic, depending on how many more shots off it gets on these hammer tanks. The numbers are evaporating. The sheer numbers that were winning the battle for Jeje just a little while ago are now actually not going to be enough, as the V4s clean up clusters and the Apocalypse tanks trying to go to town on the rest. Now, of course, if these V4s get targeted down and the hammer tanks rush by their counterparts, then it's going to be potentially all over. Now, we still have another Apocalypse tank coming to the front lines, but there's not a whole lot of reinforcements. Jeje could be using these Terror Drones on the back end of this, but he's not going to be, and as a result, the A-move nature will actually be allowing Dimon to win that battle. Can he win the war is the question. He's down a couple of expansions in comparison to his opponent, which of course means the macro of Jeje is going to be more powerful. Oh my word, is he actually down 3 expansions over his opponent? He's only got 2 mining refineries at this point. A third one just now going to be finishing up versus the 5 mining refineries of Jeje, which, I mean, some of these should be pretty close to depletion at this point. 4,000 credits, that's still enough for a couple of more Apocalypse tanks. That's still enough for some more units. And then, of course, depleted, you still get some cash, even though it is extremely reduced. Split away from the V4s, and hey, there's a bear here. I don't know how much he's actually going to be doing, as we do have the Terror Drones locking down the units of their opponents, but a fully heroic Bullfrog here to clear the skies and eliminate those Twin Blades from actually doing very much more than just killing off a couple of Terror Drones. As in come the Apocalypse tanks, one of them is Harpoon, the other one is potentially going to be going up against these V4s. He's trying to lock them down, he's trying to eliminate them from being able to fire too many more shots, as more of these Hammer tanks are going to be going down. It is infected by a Terror Drone. Goodbye, Apocalypse tank, as it does get eliminated. This other V4 gets completely destroyed as well. And I thought there was another V4 somewhere out on the field, but I guess it's not actually there, as I paused for basically no reason at all. Ended up hitting the wrong key there. Apocalypse tanks getting repairs. There's a MiG looking for some units to target down, and Jeje, he doesn't know how to build anti-air very well. He knows how to build MiGs. He knows how to build a... Oh no, I guess he does have a Bullfrog. Haha, that Dreadnought, man. He does know how to build a flak cannon. Yeah, I think he's only built 1 flak cannon this entire game. But Jeje, both of these players have been struggling with dealing with aircraft. Not saying it's necessarily easy, but it is a weak point for them both in this particular game. Bullfrogs coming in for both players, cleans up a single Twin Blade there. Do we have any more Twin Blades on the Remax? The answer is no. We do have most likely just more Apocalypse tanks flushing on out. Not sure if there's a Stingray on the way. There is indeed. Will it actually activate its secondary ability in time? The answer is no, but he does get the kill on the Terror Drone, which is quite nice for Jeje. He is able to clean that up without too much trouble. Apocalypse tanks rolling in to kind of the 4th refinery location. They are going to end up cleaning it up pretty much unopposed, and Jeje just has so much more income than his opponent. He's going to be able to clean up the oil derrick and the ore refinery, which as the game ends up going longer and longer, that oil derrick, I mean, still cranking out the same amount of money, 450 credits a minute, in comparison to the ore refineries, which over time do deplete and then don't bring in quite as much money as they once did, although it may still be more. I'm not actually sure if it's more than an oil derrick. Well, 3v1, you don't have to be all that smart, especially when one of the Apocalypse tanks is heroic, to know who's going to be winning that fight. There is going to be the Infect, though. That Apocalypse tank eventually will go down unless it worries its way all the way back to the Crusher Crane. Rocks all the way over there to clean up. Oh, heroic MiG fighters, I believe, were what it was engaging there. At least one of them is heroic. The other one may have been heroic. It looked like it was firing off those red shots as well. MiG's trying to do what they can to call down support powers, but is it actually going to be enough? No. It looks like Jeje did go heroic with a MiG of his own, while his infrastructure is getting completely destroyed. Dimon has no real units to deal with this. He's trying to rebuild his war factory, but he's lost his tier 3. He's lost his aircraft, his airfield as well, and yeah, I'm pretty sure his battle lab was somewhere over here, which means with no tier 3 production, he's going to have to pretty much rely on Terror Drones, which would be a tall order, something very difficult to do. But Dimon has been defeated, and in a Soviet mirror with some pretty heavy action and a macro focus, Jeje was able to take the victory. It wasn't all Twin Frog. I know sometimes Soviets can get really, like, scoped in on Twin Frog. They're just like, man, I gotta build Twin Blades and Bullfrogs. I gotta build Twin Blades and Bullfrogs. But sometimes it's good to build other units as well, and in this particular case, Apocalypse tanks, we got to see pretty much everything else as well from these guys. I mean, Dreadnoughts, V4s, Apocalypse tanks, even Akula subs here and there, Kirov airships. Were there any units that we didn't see? Natasha we didn't see. I don't know if we actually saw any flak troopers either.
I think those may be the only units Sputniks, but who cares about Sputniks anyways? At any rate, we saw a lot. We did not see very little. That didn't make too much sense. At any rate, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Soviet extravaganza. 22 minutes of action, and thank you all again once more for watching. It's been a fun time, but this is Sybert signing out.